So again, welcome. Today, what I'm hoping to share for you, wherever you're joining us from, are some of the headlines from Croi 2022, and they're specifically related to Croi. And I also just wanted to wish you all that happy Tuesday. Today is 2/22/22, if you're writing the address that, or the calendar date that way. And so it's a sort of little remarkable day, but probably you've already heard that from someone else today. So first of all, I just wanted to take a moment to let you all know, I'm sure many of you may have heard about Paul Farmer's passing. He was a global health pioneer, and he passed away yesterday. And I thought I would just sort of follow suit with how a lot of other people have honored him. And I borrowed this quote actually from Philadelphia Fight. They sent out an email, and I love that this quote says, what this quote says. He said that the idea that some lives matter less is the root of all that is wrong in the world. And I don't think I've heard a truer statement in a long while. So I wanted to share that with you. And it's a good memory. I didn't know the man myself, but some of you may have. And he was considered a great pioneer in global health. So also, for any of you who do live here in Seattle, I wanted to make sure that you save this date. We are renaming our clinic, and we are going to have a ceremony that the public is welcome to. So the date to save is May 20th, 2022, and it'll be from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. and it'll be at Harborview, probably outside in the back or the west side of Harborview, for those of you who are familiar with the hospital there. And I wanted to let you know that. Rachel, did you want to say anything related to that?
Well, I don't know if everybody's heard about the renaming process, and I know that many of you who've joined in the prior CAB meetings have, but would anybody like an update? And if so, I mean, Michael, you're as good as I am in leading that conversation.
I'll quickly go over. So we formerly were the University of Washington AIDS Clinical Trials Unit, which comes from the AIDS Clinical Trials Group. And so we've been known that way since our inception. However, we've been looking to sort of broaden our name to match the broadening of our scope of research that we conduct. So we not only are doing HIV research, but we're also doing COVID research, Hep B and C research, CMV research. And we're also trying to get a name that might not be as stigmatizing or make people reluctant to come join us, having the emphasis on AIDS. Most people in our area aren't experiencing AIDS, and so it's really would be HIV research. So we're trying to come up with a name that would sort of honor our past and yet still encompass all that we look to do in the moving forward. And so the name that we got through community input, we got these ideas from the community, will be UW Positive Research. And so that's going to be our new name. And we'll be working on logos, and you'll be hearing updates about that as we move forward. But please, if you would, mark down if you're interested here locally again, May 20th will be the date. And also for our community members who are local, we are looking to involve you in the planning process. So if you're interested in that, please give me send me an email, give me a buzz, let me know that you would like to help out with that. And I will be also following up with some of you for specific things that we have in store. So just to be mysterious about that. Also, I wanted to let you know this Thursday, if you are interested at 6:15 a.m. here on the Pacific Coast, I'll be moderating a conversation about long COVID. It'll be covering what we know, what we don't know, and what we need to do. It'll involve Dr. Steve Deeks, who did a presentation around long COVID at Croi, and a long COVID activist named J.D. Davids, who has a lot to say about getting the community and as well as the people living with long COVID involved in research. Also, just to put another bug in your ear, we have next Tuesday, March 1st, the second session of the Community HIV Cure Research Workshop that TAG and a lot of the Martin Delaney Collaboratory CABs put together. You can see the link there at the bottom, and that will be a talk that will feature b-nabs and will feature talk about the lack of cure research being conducted in Africa. And the final hour will be dedicated to learning more about the cure-related research that was revealed at Croi. We'll have 4 different researchers who will be giving their impressions of what's important or what was unique or what they find fascinating personally. So that's usually a great session to listen to if you're interested in hearing more about cure research from 4 different researchers' perspectives. All right, so the outline for tonight, how we're going to go about this. I'm going to be covering the possibly cured story, the HIV remission, or you may have heard of it as already as a cure that came through a cord blood transplant. And then we're going to be going into a case of post-treatment control that used basically an antibody plus ART. And then I also am going to cover something that you may not have learned about, but the Impact Network, which conducts research in pediatrics, is looking at giving ART soon after birth, and they're trying to create situations that mirror the Mississippi baby. And so they've had some of these babies in this study come up with a profile that matches the Mississippi baby, and they have no HIV antibodies. And lastly was something that I had to do some sleuthing around, but I had one of the researchers drop a line to me talking about there's also a case of post-treatment control that was created through gene therapy, specifically CAR T cells. So those are the 4 topics that we're going to be covering today. And so, first of all, just to let you know, this is all coming from Croi, the conference on retroviruses and opportunistic infections. It was supposed to be happening in in Denver this year. However, because of COVID, they went all virtual. So again, this year was another virtual Croi. Hopefully next year, it won't be virtual because I believe next year it's going to be back in Seattle. So that will be fun if it is here again. I'll be looking forward to that. So the first case, the famous case that you may have already heard if you pay attention to the news, is from New York. And it is about someone being possibly cured, a woman living in New York City who's been so far 14 months HIV remission. And so 14 months after her stem cell transplant, she is still under remission. And we're going to talk about what that means. So if you have any questions while this is going on, please raise your hand so I can see you, or if I don't see you because I'm talking too much, please, why don't you unmute yourself and speak out so I can know that you have a question, okay? So this is informal like that. Let me get this for us going. All right, so this woman who had the transplant, she was getting it because of leukemia. Again, bone marrow stem cell transplants are dangerous and shouldn't be really considered a viable cure for many different reasons. She is doing well. Her cancer and her HIV are both in remission, which is good news. But it's too soon to declare that she is cured of HIV. And we're going to be talking about that at the end of this part of the presentation, because if you experienced any of the media, a lot of them were just forgetting that part of possibly cured and just saying she is already cured. But you know, the experts are hopeful because her case mirrors the previous cases of bone marrow stem cell transplants, which used the resistant to HIV cells, the cells that had the CCR5 delta 32 mutation. So they call this one the New York patient because she is still wishing to remain anonymous. And she's very much like the first 2 that you may know, our dear friend Timothy, who has passed away, who was the first person, and our friend Adam, who is considered the second person. Timothy was known as the Berlin patient because not that he's from Berlin, but he was living in Berlin at the time of the transplant. And Adam was in London. But this is something that you may not know. People have been calling the New York patient the third patient, but that's actually incorrect because there is another person who's considered cured, and that's the Dusseldorf patient. Now, the Dusseldorf patient's doctor doesn't seem to be as media hungry, perhaps, as some others, and is not really featuring this research much. But we do know that he will be having a paper come out about this in a few months. And the Dusseldorf patient, I think, is coming out to us, will be coming out when that comes out. He's been in talks with some of the community advocates as well as with Adam, and Adam's already met him. And I've learned that his first name, I think, is Mark. But so he would be technically the third person. And so the New York patient would be considered number 4. There's also a number 5 on the way. And soon we'll probably be seeing small handfuls of people who could be cured via this method, because there's a group in Europe that's looking to do this. And there's also in America, a group doing it. In fact, we'll learn here at Fred Hutch, we have something that is similar, looking to use cord blood to help people who have cancer as well as HIV. So the New York woman has been free for 14 months. She's middle-aged and postmenopausal, and she was diagnosed in 2013 with HIV and then leukemia in 2017. And So she joined an observational study that was also run by Impact. And this study was designed to use previously screened umbilical cord blood that had the double CCR5 delta 32 mutation, meaning the person that they got the cord blood from had both the mutation from their mother and their father, or it was homozygous is the way they would call that in science. So as you may know, about 1% of Northern Europeans have this mutation, but it's very rare in other populations. So this is sort of interest, and some of the stories have pointed out this woman is a mixed race person, and the reason that they're emphasizing that is because, you know, with a cord blood, you have a better chance of having a genetic match, and the double mutation, it's hard to find. In fact, in races, other races, you can hardly find it. The percentage of people who have it is 0.0000 something, and I didn't feel like writing that out. So I just wrote it as a question mark there. So this is good news that we have had a successful transplant with cord blood, because we have all sorts of minorities are underrepresented in the bone marrow donor registries. And so this opens up that doorway for people who might be experiencing cancer as well as HIV, and yet not being able to find a closer genetic match to use as a donor. So this opens up the room for other people to step in and help out. So
Michael?
Yes, go ahead.
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
where cord blood comes from? Is this from infants, or is this an adult who stored their cord blood when they were an infant? Where did they get it from exactly?
The umbilical cord. So I am assuming that they're, so I'm assuming they're getting it.
So
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. So generally you can store your own cord blood for yourself,
Right.
in which case you pay to do it. But I imagine people haven't been storing cord blood for that long. So I imagine it's not, well, it's definitely not, in this case, it's not this woman's own cord blood, but in general, cord blood, unless you want to store it and pay to bank it for yourself, it goes into, if you consent to do this, it goes into a bank. And so then it's available for anybody else to use if they need it. Again, if someone consents at the time that they give birth for their cord blood to go into this bank.
So most likely this came from an infant whose family was asked, can we store your infant's cord blood? And they said yes, and it went into this big bank, and the family may not even know that the cord blood was used, right?
Yeah, they generally don't. I don't believe that they tell you, unlike if somebody, so if an adult donates bone marrow or peripheral blood, generally what they do is they have you swab your mouth for your DNA, and then they save that sort of your DNA marker in a bank. And then if your DNA comes up as a match for somebody, then they call you up and say, hey, would you be willing to go through this process? In which case you actually go in and make the donation, either by having surgery and having them remove some of your own bone marrow, or else by them mobilizing your PBMCs, sort of similar to when research participants do leukapheresis. But in this case, I don't believe that you find out if someone has used it, and it's definitely anonymous. It remains anonymous whose it was on both sides.
Any idea how many people have given their baby's cord blood to these banks? Is it tens of thousands of people, or do we know how many are in there?
That's a good question. I could probably find that out for you. I don't have it at the tip of my fingertips, but I do know that it's routine to ask. So for example, when I gave birth to both of my children in the past 10 years, they ask everybody. It's sort of like when you go do your driver's license, it's like the sort of expectation, unless you would like to not do it, is we'd like to donate to put this in a bank.
And last question,
okay,
how long have they been asking people to donate their infant's cord blood? Do you know?
I can tell you that 20 years ago, they didn't ask.
Okay.
Because I had three kids.
Yeah.
And
I have
and Lori saying when my daughter donated her newborn's blood, they wouldn't know how it would be used. Yeah, exactly. So you're essentially it's sort of like when you donate blood at the blood bank. You don't know who's getting it and why and where. It's just, it goes off and it's frozen until it's needed.
So it's been going on for the last 10
someone
to 15
else,
years,
Jennifer's
right?
saying.
Been going
Jennifer's
on for the
saying that
last 10
her
to 15 years.
cord blood from her 17-year-old was donated. Yeah, so it's been quite a while, and they've been doing cord blood transplants are fairly routine. It's a whole other conversation about this, but there's sort of pluses and minuses for other reasons. Due to for cord blood, it makes a better transplant for some reasons and a higher risk transplant for other reasons, because you're giving an infant's immune system that is less likely to cross-react and cause the graft versus host disease, because it's more naive, right. It's more new, but it's also less experienced at fighting off other infections because it's more new.
Right.
And it's also smaller. I think it also it also smaller.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so. You get less cells.
Right. You have less cells. You have less T cells specifically because it's an immature immune system. Which is going to be the next point here. So umbilical cord in some ways is more forgiving. So the volumes of cells that you get is too small for an adult transplant. And the cells that you do get are slower to engraft or become established in the body. So what they did is basically invented a new procedure that they called the Haplo-cord transplant. So what they were doing is getting the CCR5 delta 32 mutated cells from the cord blood, but then they added donor blood stem cells without the CCR5 mutation. And so this woman had a relative who donated stem cells. And so they did a combination of the cord blood and then the adult stem cells. And what they were using the adult stem cells for was to help buy some time to get the cord blood cells established into the body. So that's the whole new transplant that is really behind this HIV remission. So the Haplo-cord transplant can support the immune system while giving the cord blood cells time to establish themselves. As well, this woman was much like Timothy Ray Brown. She had intensive chemotherapy and whole body radiotherapy before the transplant. So that's not true with other transplants, but so it's following what happened with Timothy. So she did not develop graft versus host disease, which is where the new immune system recognizes the body as a foreign invader and starts to attack it, which can be very challenging and sometimes lead to problems, including death. But within 100 days, she had achieved full engraftment, which is wonderful. She really did well with the transplant, and all of her tests now show that the new cells that she has are resistant to HIV. So using the adult stem cells as a cover really helped the new cells implant and establish themselves. What's also really interesting about this case is that not only is she resistant to the CCR5 or the R5 tropic type of HIV, she is also resistant to strains that use the CXCR4 receptor to get in. So for instance, if you know Timothy Ray Brown's case, he was immune to almost all strains of HIV, but there's about 5% of strains that use this CXCR4 receptor, and he was not immune to those. And that's why he chose to go on PrEP, to make sure that the cure that he had managed to get would stick around. He didn't want to ruin that case. But this woman, it's very curious, and I don't know if they know why, but she seems to be resistant to strains that use the CXCR4 receptor as well. So she was on her ART for 3 years after the transplant. And during that time, she was undetectable. They had no replication competent HIV that they could find. And they were even calling her, saying that she seroreverted, which means basically she became HIV antibody negative again. So, you know, once you have HIV for a while in your blood, up to about 3 months, then you start to test positive on those antibody tests, which are like the mouth swab or the finger prick. Well, this woman seroreverted, not seroconverted. And that was 1 year after the transplant that she achieved this state.
Michael?
Yes.
Can you go back to the other slide?
Yes, hold on. Go ahead. Oh.
Okay, so this is a little confusing to me. She's free of HIV 14 months after this transplant, but she had ART for 3 years after the transplant.
That's,
so
yeah.
How far out after the transplant are we? And I don't get the relationship between
so we are
on ART,
yeah,
HIV free 14 months.
Right, so it's been about 4 years now that the transplant's been done. And I'll get to that. So it is kind of confusing, but So she was transplanted and then was on ART for 3 years after that transplant.
Okay,
And
so
then-
this is really 14 months after ART
Yep.
cessation
Yes, exactly.
transplant?
Yep,
Okay,
you got
thank
it. Yep, no problem. Glad you asked that question. So, one of the things that we've learned, so there's a lot of things still that are a mystery about what makes these transplants into remissions and then cures. But it seems one of the most vital things is that we need to use stem cells from donors with a double CCR5 delta 32 mutation. It seems to be crucial for these to work. So for instance, if you remember, there was another case back in 2013, 2014, 2 HIV positive men in Boston had transplants for cancer, but they didn't get any donor cells that were resistant to HIV. And the one lasted for 3 months and the other lasted for 8 months, but in both cases, HIV rebounded. So it seems like that CCR5 delta 32 mutation is really important for a cure to occur. Also, the 2 men from Boston did not receive any intensive conditioning and radiotherapy like Timothy Ray Brown did, but that kind of makes it curious because neither did Adam Castillejo, but he still remains HIV free to this day. So you can see that it seems like certain things are needed, but we can't see that it's consistent across all of these cases. Also, what about graft versus host disease? Originally, the thinking of researchers was that that was necessary, that they thought that the graft versus host disease actually helped Timothy get rid of all of the HIV infected cells in his body. But this woman did not experience that, and she did not have graft versus host disease. And so we're still hoping that she will be cured, but that's why we want to be careful saying that she's cured. She's in HIV remission because it's still way too early for us to conclude that. So remember, stem cell transplants are not a cure for HIV. I've had many people from around the world write to us at Fred Hutch asking for a stem cell transplant because they've heard about Timothy's case and they wanted to get another one. They wanted to have that happen to them, and they don't understand why we can say that there are people cured, but that we still don't have a cure for HIV that's accessible and available to all people. So just some quick notes. The stem cell transplants are medically intensive. They are very costly, very expensive, and they're not scalable to treat the millions of people who are living with HIV. So that's why, very briefly, the stem cell transplants are not considered a cure. So why is this case important then? I've had a lot of people on social media who are a little bit sour about the fact that, yes, we're advertising another potential cure, but it's still through these bone marrow stem cell transplants, and they're not going to ever be able to get one. So why is this case important to them? Well, this case provides further proof that the latent reservoir can be cleared enough at least to produce a durable remission. And so it also offers us some clues to what a more widely applicable cure will look like. So even though it is not a cure that's widely going to be scalable to everyone around the world, it is still a hopeful a hopeful achievement. Michael, did you want to ask a question? You can unmute yourself.
I put it in the chat, but
Oh.
How did they establish that she is resistant now to both R4 tropic and R5 tropic?
They did a lot of tests. They take some of the cells and they're testing them that way.
Okay,
I'm not
so
sure
it's
about the
in vitro
CX
challenges.
Yes, not
Okay.
not in vivo, in vitro. Yeah, so that's how they're determining that.
I have a question and a comment.
Go ahead.
Did you say does she know when she was infected with HIV, how long she had it?
She was tested for in 2013, and they do not give us that information, or at least not that I could see. If that information is in a paper that'll be coming out,
Okay.
we'll have to wait for that.
But we think about 10 years, so it wasn't a new infection, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I know that she was tested in 2013. How long she lived with HIV before that, I couldn't tell you.
Okay. Just important to say that this wasn't a recent infection, which would be very different from an established infection. And then the other thing, I just want to say that I always say when people ask me about why can't I get this cure, I think there have been a number of people, I don't know if it's 5 or 6, who have done this and actually die. I mean,
Yes.
it kills people too. And I think it's always important to say that this is a life-threatening situation. And I always say, would you rather take your pill every day or have a 40% risk of death doing this? You know, and that usually sends people, okay, I'll take my pill every day. I'm happy with that.
Exactly. And you're exactly right. The bone marrow stem cell transplants are dangerous. And they could take your life. The transplant itself could take your life. Gero Hooter, who was Timothy's oncologist, who helped us discover this first cure, he did put out, I think it was a research letter to the editor, where he talked about 6 other patients, and all of them passed away for one reason or another. Some of it was from the cancer that they originally had. Some of it was from the results of the bone marrow stem cell transplant. But you are absolutely right. That's why we can't have people get it just for HIV. They need to have the transplant because they need to survive, or they're trying to survive their leukemia or their Hodgkin's lymphoma, one of the cancers that they have. And so the treatment is a last ditch chance for their, you know, it's worth it if you're facing certain death from your cancer, but it's not worth it if you're living well on HIV and doing a pill a day.
I tell a story about
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Just let me finish. I tell a story about a good friend of mine who had cancer, and we were all desperately searching for a donor match for him. And we found one. We were thrilled. Everybody was so excited. And then he went through the chemo and radiation and killed him before he even got the stem cell transplant.
Wow.
You know, it's so intense what they had to do to destroy your immune system that he never even got the transplant.
Wow.
So this is incredibly dangerous procedure.
Wow. Anne, did you have something?
Well, I just remember Timothy saying that he would not have wished this on his worst enemy because it was so awful.
Right.
And I think what Mark just said sort of echoes that.
It totally does.
That it's just incredibly dangerous. And I think that people who sort of wish it may not appreciate that.
Right. I think, and especially when I was telling you that
some of it is also just delaying that the compensation freezes.
I couldn't hear that.
A leave of absence.
I don't know. But if you also remember, Timothy had 2 bone marrow stem cell transplants, and he had a 5% chance of surviving the second one. And he always would tell us in his stories afterwards that he was glad he didn't know about that percentage, because he probably wouldn't have had much hope about surviving.
I think it's still important that we still bring up the dangerousness of them and keep speaking the truth of it. This still invites the community and those of us who are living with HIV to feel safe, that that there's truth coming from it, because of so many years being told that there's very little research, or being that myth that that you are a test dummy. But speaking about that will make some people want to do that. I know for myself, when I had an interruption, that's when Timothy had passed. And if it wasn't for getting encouragement from my sister, I wouldn't have even tried the study, because I was pulling out of it. But my sister told me, how can you, a research recruiter, and you chair the beat, and you're going to pull out, so you can't ask anybody to do anything, so you don't have a comment. So doing this is so important. Having conversations about the negative side of things to still do it is very, very important.
I agree. It's being transparent, and that's the only way you can really build trust with people, is to always be transparent about what's going on. So the one thing I wanted to point out to you all is the way that this news hit the media. The most egregious to me is the New York Times up there, where we have the headline saying a woman is cured of HIV. And I know the research team was expressly clear, saying we cannot call this a cure, it's too early. And yet here we have the headline. Probably not the author of the article. They don't usually get to create the headlines, and the headlines are often clickbait. They're trying to get you to read the article, to click on the article, or to tune in. But you can see some of the other ones. So down there, the NBC, we have the possibly cured being used. And then you can see others. The third person living with HIV has been cured by transplant. I love the Optimist Daily. They kind of do both. They said, maybe a cure. First woman cured of HIV. At least they put a little bit of doubt there. And they have down there with the Wall Street Journal, appears cured. So I don't know how you guys feel about these things. But I know that when I saw the New York Times article, I kind of was like, it's too early. Like I didn't even get to hear the Croi presentation. And I know that the researchers didn't call her cured like that, at like the headline here is saying, you know. So third person ever to be cured. I just think that it's really, really important for us to make sure that these headlines are accurate. You know, so if you're ever looking for a little bit of advocacy and you have a little time on your hands, I always think of an appropriate letter to the editor, or it's writing sometimes to the author on Twitter, because they'll usually give you their Twitter handle. Can't do any harm, and can make sure that at least that we know and they know that we're knowing what they're doing and what's happening there. So just some of the headlines about this. But did you have any other questions or comments about this fourth potential cure or HIV remission?
I was just going to add the comment that I had people who are not, I think, in the HIV community that were asking me on Twitter about, you know, why are we emphasizing that it's a woman? Isn't that saying like it's a woman astronaut as opposed to just like she's an astronaut? And isn't that sort of being gender biased, et cetera? And I think, you know, obviously many of you are well aware of the fact that many of these, you know, HIV cure and research in general has understudied and underappreciated women, and the role of the fact that women are immunologically different, whether trans or cis women, and people who have estrogen in their body, whether endogenous or exogenous, and just how important that is because of the fact that women control HIV differently, that their immune system is different. And so it was sort of interesting, I thought, to see sort of a lot of questions come to me about like, why are we emphasizing that this is a person of mixed race, as well as being female, and why they were highlighting that. And maybe that's more obvious to those of you in the community here than I feel like people who are not in the community. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I've had similar conversations with people who are not as locally involved in the HIV community that we have here. You know, they weren't getting it, but I didn't really have that same comment come from any of the people who are close to us in terms of our, you know, research advocates. I think they got it. I think, and there's a great NPR interview with Carlos Del Rio, where he talks about that. He talks about himself being uncomfortable with the use of mixed race, but he talks about why he thinks the researchers emphasized both that she was a woman and she was of mixed race. And because of the dearth of research that is specific to women, I think it's also important symbolically that people realize that the cure that we are working on is trying to be accessible to everyone. And so this is an example that we have yet to see in the few cures that we do have. Hopefully one day we'll not have to worry about these things. So the other thing I wanted to emphasize to you all, and this is something you might want to look up. So there is a researcher named Filippo Milano who received $1 million grant at Fred Hutch to do the same thing. So his study aims to cure blood cancers with transplants that use cord blood, but he's also going to be using the CCR5 Delta 32 mutation to potentially cure HIV. So they're looking for 10 HIV positive cancer patients. I tried to get in touch with him today. He just wrote to me before this meeting started. And so he did say that they have not yet enrolled anyone. And I don't know if COVID had anything to do with that, but I think probably so, because this news came out right before COVID around 2019. And so they probably haven't had a chance to enroll people yet in that because of the COVID restrictions that have been placed on HIV research, especially at the Hutch. You know, they're trying to protect people's immune systems from getting COVID, especially when they might be having cancer treatments being done. So exciting, though, that we could have the potential for more Yours coming up. Okay, 2 participants have their hands raised. So Kate, why don't we go with you first, and then Virgil, I'll go second.
Yeah, so just so that I'm clear on this, right now, as it stands, the only people that are eligible for this type of potential cure is people that have had cancer previously?
No, who currently have cancer and need the stem cell transplant to cure the cancer or to get the cancer into remission. So yes, the primary,
So
go ahead.
So are they gonna work from here to try and make it compatible for everybody, even though they possibly may not have cancer?
So this strategy seems to work for people who have cancer as well as HIV. They're hoping that these cases will inform a potential cure that will be accessible to more people. So for instance, this type of work might help us use gene therapy in a much more targeted way that would actually lead to a cure that would be accessible to everyone. So think of these studies as not actually eventually becoming a cure itself, but helping us design or figure out how to cure other people without needing to have cancer and not needing to have a bone marrow stem cell transplant.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure I was reading the article and everything on it.
Sure.
Understanding it correctly. Thank you.
You're welcome, Kate. Nelson.
Yeah, hey, Michael, a great presentation. These patients are looking for I have 2 questions, but I'll ask the first one. Do they have to have failed a round of chemo or radiation, or these are cancer positive prior to actual chemo or radiation?
Right.
That's my question.
Sure. So as far as I know, that the bone marrow stem cell transplant or this cord blood transplant is a last ditch effort. So in other words, they've tried chemo and it's not been working. They've tried the other things before they go to this. This is the last shot, so to speak. So they would have to probably go through something. They just can't have cancer and they immediately get a bone marrow stem cell transplant.
I get it. So it's like what we used to call salvage in
Yes.
HIV. Okay, and for promoting, not promoting, you cannot use that word in clinical trials, but to letting people know, I think all cancer centers network with each other. How do they? I mean, that's not your specialty, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But this must be something where they're all connected, right? These are people that have to live in Seattle. They cannot be flying in.
No, they don't have to live in Seattle. It'll be done in Seattle, but they could live almost anywhere, I would imagine. I don't know if there's any help or assistance in traveling, but I know people have traveled for sorts of cancer treatments at the Hutch prior. So you wouldn't have to live here, but you'd have to be able to get to Seattle to the Hutch. I don't know if they're having any sort of satellite sites, but that's one of the things I wanted to ask Dr. Milano about. So I'm hoping that I'll be getting a good update and I can share this information with you all once I talk to him. He just responded to the email and I didn't even get a chance to read it though. So
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I just talked to Filippo last week, and I think he's actually looking to line up with one of the networks. And it's actually maybe a question for you as well, Michael. I wasn't sure that this was best lined up with the ACTG, but maybe either the AMC or the Cancer Immunotherapy Trials Network.
Right.
But I think he is trying to line up with one of the national networks to be able to make this more of a kind of multi-site thing. And again, I don't know, maybe this is a better question for Anne. We can talk about it offline about kind of which one of these networks would be the best place to line up with. But I think that is his plan, is to try to make this more accessible. Again, accessible is sort of in quotes because it is still a stem cell transplant, but to people throughout the country.
Yeah, no, I think the more partners that he has helping him with this, he'll more quickly enroll his study. You know?
Let me just add that I'm sure Dr. Milano was brilliant because he comes from an amazing family.
I agree with that. So just wanted to give you an idea of this is going on. I'm sure the news of the potential cure last week, I hope it excited him because it seems like he was onto something and he got this before they actually achieved this remission. So the next cure study that we're going to talk about is coming to us from Denmark. And it's about someone who's remained undetectable for quite a while, only from taking an antibody-based therapy. And he's been almost 4 years undetectable without using HIV medicines. And so this also, there were other people in the study. He was just one person to achieve this undetectable or this post-treatment control. But the antibody did enable other people who were sensitive to it to stay off ART for at least 3 months. So it delayed their rebound for 3 months. And so this is coming from 2 different reports from Croi about this study. And the name of the study was the E-Clear study, but we'll be getting to that. So an overview of this, a study participant, just one, they're avoiding the word cure, but he's been off his ART and he's had an undetectable viral load for 3.7 years, almost 4. And what did this? Well, it was a combination of a broadly neutralizing antibody and a drug that prevents HIV-infected cells from becoming latent and hiding from the immune system. You may know it as a latency reversing agent, or you may know it as the drug romidepsin. So this is just an isolated case. He was 1 out of 59 people in the study to achieve this, and he was also only 1 out of the 20 people who maintained an undetectable viral load after their treatment interruption. 6 other people were off ART, but they lasted around 3 months or 12 weeks. So just realize that we're talking about one person. He's sort of an outlier. So the E-Clear study was done in 5 sites in Denmark, as well as 2 sites in London. And they had a total of 59 people who were recently diagnosed with HIV and yet who had never started ART. So they were starting it with the study. So they had 15 people who were in the control arm, which they were only going to get ART. And then they had 15 people who were also going to start ART through the study, but they received 2 infusions of this b-nab, or this broadly neutralizing antibody called 3-BNC117. And they got it 7 days and then 21 days after they started the ART. 13 people in the 3rd cohort were given ART and romidepsin, and they got romidepsin 3 times. They got it at day 10, day 17, and day 24 after they started their ART. And then the last group got all of them. They were given ART and they got both the b-nab and the romidepsin. So there were 4 different cohorts in this study, and you can see they had a nice little breakdown of it, almost equal.
Now,
So,
Michael,
yes, go
with
ahead.
this, were they, from what I'm gathering, you're saying that they got people shortly after they got infected.
Exactly.
So if that's the case, that can play, a big important factor on the size of the reservoir and how defective the immune system would be at the time of treatment.
Right. So not all of them were treated early. Some of them had HIV for a while. One person had a viral load that was, I might be quoting this wrong, but I think I read 24 million.
Wow.
So
well, that is the earlier has very, very high viral load.
Right.
So 24 million is, I mean, it's not that unusual for early HIV.
Right. Okay. True. I forgot about that. The spike that happens at the beginning of
happens at the beginning. I mean, I know that we saw people who had viral loads of like 50 million.
Wow.
I mean, that's high.
Yeah.
That's really high.
Yeah. So Mark, to your point, there was the viral loads were all over. There was a wide berth of number in terms of the viral loads. So I assume that means they started maybe early, maybe a little bit later. You could look at the specifics. I don't think I have broke it down specifically in these slides, but they did give you more details about the different viral loads at people who started.
The critical point is that their viral reservoir would be much, much smaller than those of us who've had this for years. That's the essential thing there.
Exactly. So also one thing to realize about antibody therapy is that people can be resistant to the antibodies, and this happens a lot in HIV. So the resistant mutations to the antibodies happen naturally for people, and that can affect how these results came out. So for instance, with people who got just the b-nab and ART, 47% of them had resistance to the b-nab. And so it didn't really work. As well as the people who got all 3 therapies, they found 37% of them had a resistance. So obviously these results are exciting when they work, but one of the things that we're going to have to look at in terms of using antibody therapy for an HIV is this resistance problem. We're going to have to test people prior to giving them that and figure out which b-nabs may work for them and which b-nabs may not. So also realize that this is a kick and kill study. So the decline in viral loads that happen were the result of the kick, which is the romidepsin waking up the latent cells, and then the kill that was happening with the antibodies. So with people who got the antibodies, they had an 80% decline in the number of infected CD4 cells that were producing viral proteins. And the people who got, if they also got the romidepsin, they had a 2-fold increase in the productively infected cells. So what this means, hold on. So what this means is that because the first romidepsin dose was given 3 days after the first antibody dose to people who got both, there were more cells that were visible to the antibodies and they could be taken care of. So when people got both romidepsin and the antibody, they had the best results in terms of getting more cells awake, the kick part, and then the kill part could do its part. So that was perfectly timed 3 days after the first antibody to have that happen. But after the first dose of romidepsin, there was no impact. So it seems like only the first time giving romidepsin did it seem to do anything. Afterwards, it made no difference. So the most important lab finding from the study, according to the researchers, was basically around the CD8 cells. Now, your CD8 cells are known to kill off the virally infected cells in your body, and their memory for HIV fades gradually. So they last a long time and they do their killing job a long time. So the result that they think was important was that the people who were sensitive to the b-nab that they were given, the number of CD8 cells that were sensitive to HIV was greatly enhanced. So they had a lot more CD8 cells that could recognize HIV and take care of it because of the b-nab. So this b-nab seems to create a strong anti-HIV CD8 response. And that's also what we see in a lot of the HIV controllers or the people who naturally control HIV, and so without ART. And so what this study seems to be suggesting is that this b-nab really helped create the type of anti-HIV CD8 responses that we want to see happen. And that's probably what helps this one person who's been controlling now HIV off of meds for a while. So they also, because of the b-nab, the people who got the b-nab, they saw a greater decline in the number of CD4 cells that were carrying intact proviral DNA. And basically in the control group, they saw a decline of about 69%, but people who got the b-nab, whether it was the b-nab alone or the b-nab plus romidepsin, 82% and 84%. And then people who just got romidepsin, 78%. So you can see the greatest decline in the CD4 cells with proviral DNA was with the b-nab. So the b-nab really seems to be shaping the immune response, which was the excitement that they were relaying at Croi. So the second part of the study was to take participants off of their ART and go through a treatment interruption. So after 400 days on ART, participants were asked if they wanted to go on a treatment interruption, and 20 of them agreed. So the restart criteria was if the viral load increased above 5,000 or if the CD4 count fell below 350. And if neither of these were the case in 12 weeks or in 3 months, both the patients and the investigators would discuss it if they wanted to continue on the ATI. 7 people met that criteria at the end of the ATI. They went through the full 12 weeks and they were still okay according to the criteria. So 2 of them were on ART alone. 1 of them was on the ART and romidepsin. 1 of them was in the ART and the b-nab. And 3 of them had all 3, the ART plus romidepsin plus the b-nab. So I find that interesting as results there, that out of the 20 people who agreed, 7 people could make it for the full 3 months. And then just how it breaks down, I don't know if we can, it seems hard to me to conclude anything. 2 people who just got ART alone, were still on the ATI. However, after this, they found out too by looking that 5 of the people had high levels of this antiviral protein called interferon gamma. And this, the higher levels of this before the ATI actually became predictive of the lack of viral rebound. So before they started the ATI and they drew blood, they found that this protein, this antiviral protein, was present, and when it had higher levels, it seemed to predict that people would do well with the ATI. And they were excited about this because, as you may know, this could be a potential marker for us to use for people who may be able to stay undetectable on an ATI. So we might eventually be able to wean ourselves from treatment interruptions because we might have a marker that we can just look in the blood to see who will do well on an ATI and who will not.
Well, Michael, I actually brought this up with Louis Montagnier.
Yeah.
You know, he obviously has done a lot of work with the interferon alpha.
Right.
But, you know, you can give interferon gamma. So I'm wondering why one would be, and obviously by giving, you know, this information, if one would then perhaps do an infusion or do the injections of interferon gamma, you may be able to cause the same event to occur.
Exactly. Did someone else have their hand raised? I see just a hand raised. I'm getting a signal there, but I can't see what name is by it.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, go ahead.
I was curious what the gentleman that is keeping his HIV in remission, what controlled arm of that study he was in, what was he receiving? Do we know that?
You know, I don't know if I actually can remember that. Let me see if it's in the next slide I have, because I do focus on him, but I'm not sure, Kate. I can find it out though.
Okay.
So again, one person remains off ART and he's undetectable and he has a viral load below 50, but then that's also been for almost 4 years. They've actually done some ultrasensitive PCR tests and his viral load is at 0.2 copies per milliliter of blood. So they've done a lot of testing just to see how much they can find. And that's a lot, not a lot actually. That's a low number there, 0.2 copies. I've never heard anyone having a point something of copies. But again, remember, this is not a cure and they're not calling it a cure because he has not had all of the HIV disappear from his body. So they're still trying to figure out what they're going to call this. Is this a long-term remission? Is it an extreme case of post-treatment control? Of course, we have to see how long he goes, but if we're using as a sort of barometer for cure, if we're saying that after 5 years in remission, someone is technically cured of cancer, maybe they're cured of HIV, this person's almost 4 years through, maybe it'll just be another year, and we can say that this person has been cured through this process.
Could be called a functional cure.
Definitely, we have all those terms that we have to still sort of go, or it could just still be a long-term remission. What do you all think? What would you call it? Let's say he makes another year, he makes it to year 5, and he still is in this case where he has a viral load, but it's at 0.2 copies.
Remission.
Yeah.
Remission, it's not a cure if he's still got HIV.
I agree with you. I agree with you, because when we get to functional cure, that's sort of clouding the definitions. I like to call it a long-term remission as well.
Well,
so
we talk about functional cures a lot. I mean, we're all functionally cured of chickenpox, even though we had that virus in our body our entire lives. So I do not say I'm in remission from chickenpox. I say I am functionally cured of chickenpox. So I say to people with HIV all the time, the sterilizing cure, I think, is decades away. But a functional cure is, much more within grasp. And I don't want to take the word cure away from that. I think if your viral load remains undetectable for many, many years, and you cannot transmit and you don't need any meds,
right,
you're functionally cured of HIV. Let's not take that away from us. I think it's important hope to hold out, because the functional cure is realistically the only thing a lot of us are going to live to see. The sterilizing cure is a long time away.
I agree. Michael, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah. Do you know if other lab work was done to see, for instance, if if the inflammatory markers that we know are present in people living with HIV were reduced in this person with this very low sustained viral load?
I do not know, and I have not seen that in the report that I was reading. I did not see mention of that, but I'm sure that's going to be ongoing sort of investigations, because I think that's a big question for people, that if they do get this functional cure, will they still have the inflammation response to these that way? So I didn't see it in this presentation, but I'm hoping that they will be following this person and determining that for us, because I know that's going to be a big question. And Lori, I see your hand up. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I think, the challenge with the term functional cure is it's been used so many different ways and it means a lot of different things. It's kind of imprecise language. So, something like, durably suppressed or something like that feels closer. I know that there's a lot of power in the word cure, but I just think it's a term that creates a lot of confusion. And I think it's a problematic term to use.
Yeah, and there was a paper, I think you were on that paper that was written about the problematic uses of functional cure.
Yeah, I was
discussing that. Yeah, so I mean, I remember
in my webinars, I go through sterilizing cure, functional cure, remission, long-term suppression, and I find it pretty easy to explain. People get it. I don't think we shouldn't underestimate people. I say a sterilizing cure removes all the HIV in the body.
Mm-hmm.
A functional cure allows you to control HIV in the same way you control the chickenpox virus without any treatment, and people get it. I
Mm-hmm.
think, functional cures. I say your body has two ways of dealing with an invader. It can either get rid of it completely, or it can control it, which our body does for many things, like the fungus for PCP pneumonia, which many of us have, but we never get sick from it. So I talk about the two ways your immune system deals with a pathogen, and those are the two cures: sterilizing and functional. So I find it easy to explain it personally. Right. It's not people get it when I do.
Right. Mark, I don't think the problem's with the community. I think it's the way the researchers use functional cure. In other words, I've been to so many talks where they use that term and they're not being precise in their use of it, which is the part where people get confused. I find that you're absolutely right. The way you describe it, people can really follow that. And I think you did a good job of explaining that here. It's that listening to researchers, they'll call Timothy Brown functionally cured, and then they'll have an argument. No, he's classically cured or sterilizing cured, and so that's where I think the confusion, at least for me, came from, is like, how are these people using that term and why are they meaning different things to describe the same event?
Right.
So
well, my question is with these people that they're labeling as cured,
mm-hmm.
Is it completely out of the body? Because it can stay in many parts of the body that we still don't really have much information on, like your spinal fluid or in the brain.
Right.
And they really don't know that. So just because they're not coming up with any antibodies for the HIV in their system,
right,
when they're tested, does that truly mean that it's out of their system completely?
Right. So, for instance,
there are ways to do really invasive procedures to check everywhere in the body. And I know with Timothy Ray Brown, they looked everywhere. I mean, every possible fluid and organ, extensively for years, and they never found it. So I'm very confident that Timothy did achieve a sterilizing cure and there was no HIV in his body, because they looked like crazy for that, and they really tried. They couldn't find it. So no, it is possible, I think, to verify that. The thing I found fascinating is the two people in Boston that you talked about that got the regular stem cell transplant. They looked at their CD4 cells and they looked at what % of their CD4 cells were from the transplant and what percent were their old CD4 cells.
Right.
And it was 0.0001% of their old CD4 cells remained. And even with that tiny fraction, the infection was able to restart completely. So that just shows how difficult a sterilizing cure will be.
Exactly. And having your cells, the new immune cells replaced by resistant cells was a key that kept that, because Timothy, if he didn't have those resistant cells, he probably would have had a rebound eventually. We had Gary Steincall, who was the patient B of those Boston patients. He came to Seattle and we recorded that. If you want, I can share that link when I send out the email. The event was really great. We had the researcher, Tim Hendrick, as well as Gary Steincall, talking all about that experience of what it was like to get into that study and then to believe that you were perhaps cured for at least 8 months and then have it come back, and the roller coaster that was for him emotionally. But you're absolutely right. I think when there's that sort of classic cure or just plain old cure, if we're going to use that word, it's going to be using those CCR5 delta 32 mutations, at least until we get maybe somewhere else with that. But let's go on. So there's another study. Oh, wait. So it's still the early days of b-nab therapy. I'm sorry. So realize that we're going to have more powerful combinations of b-nabs that we can probably use. So using this one b-nab is a great start, but we're probably going to see b-nabs being used as ARV drugs, as well as like they did in this study, using it as a therapeutic vaccine to perhaps change the immune response and help control the number of cells that will be remaining with HIV. So just sort of hopeful news about b-nabs being used. So the next study is about children, and can we make children into post-treatment controllers? And that's what they're going to try to find out. So this study has found that as soon as they're treated as soon as possible after birth, some children seem to be able to do without treatment, or that's the question they're going to ask. So the study that we're going to be looking at is by impact, once again. And Debbie Prasad is the leader of the study, and she was the one who was behind the Mississippi baby case. So the conclusions of this study are basically nearly a third of the babies that with HIV that were in the study who are given ART very soon after birth have no HIV antibodies 2 years later. So they are trying to create the Mississippi baby situation again in a much broader number of babies. And so the study was looking to see if by year 2 of age, some would have no HIV antibodies and no measurable integrated proviral DNA. Basically, they're trying to match the profile of the Mississippi baby. And this suggests that if they were to be taken off therapy, they might turn out to be post-treatment controllers, just like in adults. And this would be really important because children have a lot more problems with side effects to ART, as well as just adhering to ART. I just always remember one of the local researchers who works in pediatrics and HIV here talking about the medicine tasting like cherry motor oil. And so, you know, as a baby, that's not something that you're probably going to be taking easily. And so it was always difficult to get the babies to take them because of the side effects and the adherence. So if they're treated immediately after birth, it may be very close to the date of infection, and they might have a little HIV that may have yet been integrated into their DNA in the CD4 memory cells. And that's because those CD4 memory cells are underrepresented in their immature immune systems. So this kind of makes it a unique case for trying to create more post-viral or post-treatment control for infants. So they had started off, go ahead.
So these children were HIV positive to begin with then?
They were born with HIV, yes. And so I'm going to go into the two groups that they got the babies from, because there's two groups that they made one cohort from. So they looked at 440 children that were of high risk of acquiring HIV in the womb. They didn't necessarily already know that they had it, but they were started because it was presumed they might have HIV, like with the Mississippi baby, they presumed it. But this meant that ART was started with these 440 children within 7 hours of their birth. And so out of that, 34 of them did indeed have HIV. And that's pretty remarkable to me, the numbers there. So starting ARTS may have helped some of those babies not seroconvert, but 34 of them in that first group had HIV. And then they also found 20 children who started ART within 33 hours of being born. And they were also enrolled into the study within 10 days. And so if you take those two numbers together, the cohort that we're going to actually be looking at was 54 babies. These babies needed to have a viral load that went below 200 at week 24 on ART. And then at 48, they had to be below 20 copies per milliliter of blood. So that was 54 children. 47 of them were from Africa, 4 of them from South America, 2 from North America, and 1 from Asia. And by age 2, 30% of these children had undetectable HIV RNA, HIV DNA, and undetectable antibodies, just like the Mississippi baby. So therefore, the conclusion of the study was that they are potentially eligible for an ATI to see if they have become post-treatment controllers. So the whole point of the study was to see if they couldn't recreate those conditions like the Mississippi baby. Oh, let me get that in there.
Interesting.
Yes.
Because when I had my kid back in 91,
yes,
they tested him for the first year of his life.
Uh-huh.
And at a year, if he was still negative, that's when they labeled him as the negative child. But they said the HIV was in his system. It just was not affecting him. So this is kind of interesting to me as far as, because if they're starting them on the ARTs from birth or even in the womb, how is there to know that these children are going to have it, considering by the time they turn a year old, they convert to their own immune system?
Right. So that's a great question, Kate, and I'm not very familiar with pediatrics, but my first response would be come to our workshop next Tuesday, because Debbie Prasad, who did this study, will be one of the 4 researchers talking about the cure research at Croi, and you'll be able to ask your question directly to her.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I can't answer it, and I don't want to cloud the water by coming up with some sort of answer or a hypothesis that I may have. So just to wrap up this part, what the study team is now trying to do is to figure out how they might be able to put these babies on a treatment interruption, and how they could do this safely, and how they could do it with getting adequate warning signs of the viral rebound. So that's what they're working on next with this. But the point of this study was just to sort of create the situation that they could even be considering this. And I thought that was pretty interesting. But we do know that even if they go on an ATI, the Mississippi baby had HIV come back, and you know, part of me, if I was a mother, I might not want my child to go on an ATI, because I would want them to continue to have these great qualities, and maybe that would actually take care of them. But there's no way to know if they have a post-treatment control under their belt. It would be great if we could give babies a course of medicines for just a little while, and then actually have them become post-treatment controllers, at least for a few years, so they're not on constant medicines from the day of their birth through all of those formative years. I think that would be a good thing to determine as well. So I think this is important work, and I wanted you all to know about it. Were there any questions about this? Go ahead.
Yeah, Michael, I thought that if the mother was on treatment, that substantially diminished the risk of mother to child transmission. So wouldn't it just be better to make sure the mother was in treatment while she was pregnant, as opposed to worrying about treating after?
Right. But if you notice that first cohort that I was talking about, they had 440 babies that were born to mothers who had viremia. So we're not even doing a good job of getting people on treatment, let alone mothers on treatment. So there's still issues around that. And so I think that's why we're looking at it. And from the baby's perspective.
Michael, I still think it's a very unknown as far as the babies go, because there has been, I'm not the only one that was not on medications. I had my son in the early years before the medications for women when they wanted to get pregnant and all that stuff to control the virus itself.
Right.
So and I was not on any type of medications prior to giving birth. And my son was negative. So I think it's still, how it is transferred from mother to child is still kind of, they know more about it now than they did then, but it's still a touchy situation. They can't really give you a full answer as to why some get it and some don't. So, I mean, like I said, it's changed a lot since then, and it'll be interesting to learn more in the Tuesday Zoom meeting. But
Yes.
I think it all depends on the mother and how healthy she stays as well when she's pregnant, as to whether the child is going to get it or not.
Right, and it's actually the process of birth where the babies are usually exposed to HIV due to the blood that's involved. So I know that that's why they try to give a sort of protective dosage of nevirapine, which is during birth then supposed to help protect the baby from getting exposed to HIV.
Yeah. It's still, I just think there's still a lot of unknown around transmission from mother to child still.
Yes, I'm sure there
But
are.
I think it's a very interesting study that they're working on.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and I think that's why I wanted to highlight this study as opposed to some of the others, because it's good to hear about pediatrics. You know, babies have different immune systems. They're just forming. And so we're going to need cures for babies as much as we're going to need them for adults.
Well, the baby carries the mother's immune system for the first year of their life.
Yes.
So until the first year is over with, they don't recruit. At that point in time is when they create their own immune system.
So the last study I want to talk about is coming to us from the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And that's why I have the Love statue there, my hometown, and where William's coming to us from. And the question here is, can engineered T cells provide HIV control or even an HIV cure? And this is a specific case, and we're calling it the third time's a charm, or is the third time a charm. It's from a friend of ours named James Riley, who comes to us through the Beat HIV Collaboratory. And he gave a little talk at Croi that was about the new and improved T-cell CARs for HIV eradication or control. And really, this is another study that's going to focus on one individual that's in a unique situation. So just kind of briefly, this is a study that was looking at a CAR T cell that they were making. So they would collect people's cells, T cells, and they would make them into CAR T cells by adding a chimeric antigen receptor to the cell. Plus, they were trying to do other gene editing with zinc fingers to make these cells also resistant to HIV. And now Jim told me today that they succeeded partially in doing this, but they would have some that would have the CAR on it, but not the protective mutation that they were trying to create with the gene editing. So they didn't really have success making all of the cells, both a CAR T cell, as well as making them resistant to HIV. But that's what they were trying to do. And you can see the questions there below that arrow where what they were trying to answer. And they separated the parts and the people into two different cohorts. So some of the conclusions that they have, this study is still going on. They had 8 individuals go through it so far. One individual did not stop taking medicine. All the participants were male. They're having a real trouble recruiting females, women into this study. The racial mix was Caucasian and African-American. There were no serious adverse effects. 4 individuals could not complete the ATI due to a high viral load rebound. And they were all in their the ATI immediately group. And now 4 were also able to complete the ATI with low but persistent viral loads. And all of these came from the second cohort, which was a delay ATI. One of the individuals, which is what I wanted to highlight to you, one of these individuals has maintained very low viral loads and has opted for, after consulting with his doctor, to remain on his ATI. So this person is interesting to them and is going to be warranting further study. So 1 out of these 8 so far has managed to control their HIV, but there's some outstanding situations here. First of all, this person has been in 2 other gene therapy studies prior to this study. Now, this really alarmed me because I come from, the point of view, like in vaccines, like once you're in a vaccine study and you get a vaccine product, you're excluded from further vaccine studies. And so I thought, what, gene therapy? That's not the case. And so that's partially why I talked to James Riley today, because I just didn't understand how that could be. Was that an error? But he said, no, they actually did it on purpose. Well, the person was interested in the study. But you can see the slide, it's kind of messy, but this part is the first study that the person was in, and that shows you what his viral load was like. And then that middle section there, that was the second study they were in. And then this last part is the third study that he's currently enrolled in. And it was the third time that he achieved some sort of post-treatment control with these CAR T cells. But he has had other cells that have been made resistant to HIV. He also, what was it? He has the CCR5 mutation from one of his parents. So the allele, he has at least one allele already. So all these qualifying pieces of data that inform us as to why this person might be achieving a post-treatment control. But I asked Jim for some more words to help explain this, and he said it's given the exploratory nature of this work that they did not exclude previous participants. And so, he said for vaccine studies, previous participation would make it difficult to figure out if the vaccine worked. But for T-cell therapy, they're just trying to see if it can work under any circumstances. So they didn't rule out the previous participation. And as if this therapy advances, they're going to have to start with treatment naive individuals in order to finally get approval. But for now, they're doing whatever they can within legal and moral standards to get a clue on what will work. So that was the answer to my one question with him. So this participant has been controlling their HIV for 65 weeks, he says. And they're going to try to characterize the engineered T cells that are persisting in his body. And they're also going to examine the reservoir, and they're going to see if the T cells have actually changed the quantity or the location of the reservoir in the genome. And they're also going to try to determine if the normal immune response to HIV has been improved by this infusion of CAR T cells. And lastly, if they're able to isolate virus from this individual, they're going to ask if any mutations have occurred to the CAR T cells.
So basically this is therapy, right?
Yes, this is a therapy. This is an attempt to try to control or cure HIV, taking your own T cells out and making them into CAR T cells by putting this genetic antenna that helps them recognize cells that are infected with HIV only and take them out.
Can you give us a little more detail on CAR T cells? How they actually, what it actually is, a chimeric antigen receptor? Yeah, so the CAR is the chimeric antigen receptor. So it's basically through gene therapy, they add this, I call it an antenna, that will help recognize specific proteins on cells that might contain HIV. So it can target that one cell over the others. So they've already had some success with CAR T cells treating cancers like leukemia that were previously uncurable. And so that's as much as I can explain to you. The actual science of it's a little bit more in depth, and I wasn't prepared to go into that tonight. But if you think of it, it's basically taking your cells. As I said, I like to call the CAR an antenna, because usually in the diagrams, the cartoons that they show you, they make it look like a little antenna that's sticking out that will help it identify either a tumor cell, or in this case, it would be an HIV cell. So it basically makes the infected cells more visible to T cells. That's a problem in cancer and in HIV, that they're invisible. Right. And it basically kind of gives you X-ray specs, so they can see these cells, these infected cells better.
The one CAR T cell scientist that I know here likes to call them ninja T cell. It makes your T cells into ninjas. Okay. So like it increases their ability to recognize and take out the cells that you want to be taken out.
Right. Can you include a link in the email that you're going to shoot out to everybody after this, so that we can go on and kind of research more on these CAR T cells?
Sure will. No problem.
Thank you.
Yep. So he also wanted me to emphasize to you all that these results are preliminary. They've not been peer reviewed. They're not published. And so it's encouraging news, but there's still a long way to go before we can say with confidence that CAR T cells will result in some sort of control or cure of HIV. But Jim also wanted to say that he's a big believer in cautious optimism. In other words, this third time's a charm with this one person is cause for some optimism that this could work, but it does not mean that it is a successful strategy to get to a cure. So it adds some hope. It adds another log to the fire, so to speak. So I see some hands are raised. I don't see who it is.
Nelson.
Nelson, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, from I don't know if you guys remember the zinc finger study from Sangamo.
Yep.
Well, back what, I don't know, 6-7 years. It's been a while. And I knew a few people. It was a tiny little study in San Francisco, and I think almost everybody. I think somebody.
Hold on, Nelson. Could we have everyone mute, please?
Claire.
I'll get it.
Yeah. Manually.
Yeah, that's on. There we go.
Okay, good. Sorry. Some of us forget.
Yes.
So yeah, I knew a few people in the study because I wanted to join it too. We're mostly long-term survivors, maybe like 10, no more than 10.
Yep.
But one of them still is controlling after the one infusion.
Yep.
Because he was heterozygous, right? He had only one CCR5 mutation instead of two. And I wonder, you know, because this is the second time I'm hearing like the heterozygous case again, another one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how many, is anybody has actually quantified how many people out there in the blood banks or whatever you call them, stem cell banks, they're actually heterozygous, not homozygous, you know?
Yeah.
Those are obviously the lower hanging fruit in this work. Mm-hmm.
Right. Go ahead.
I'm heterozygous, and I was infected in about 81, and it allowed me to keep my viral load below 500 without treatment for about almost 30 years.
Wow.
So, and then the viral load jumped up, but it definitely made me into a long-term non-progressor for decades without treatment. So, yeah, I'd love to find a trial that would be for heterozygous people. I'd join immediately.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to see. And I know, Nelson, the person you were talking about came to Seattle and talked to us about his situation. You're talking about Matt Chappelle?
Matt Chappelle. Is he still, I'm assuming that he's still, controlling.
He is, according to him.
Okay.
It depends on how you want to define controlling. He always seems to have a viral load around 500. So he's still controlling. His doctor and he are still tracking that. But so Matt seems to still be holding on, at least according to the last time I checked in with him, he was. But he came to Seattle. We had Matt Sharp as well as Matt Chappelle, who both received the similar treatments. And we also had the man who invented CAR T-cell therapy, Dr. Carl June. And so I can send those links out when I send out everything to you guys if you're interested in hearing from them about their experiences with HIV CAR T-cells. And you may not know, but CAR T-cells started with HIV therapy as the prime idea, and then they went to cancer, and now they're coming back to HIV. So it's a long, circuitous route, it seems, to getting back to HIV. And Carl June is at University of Pennsylvania, along with James Riley, who is the one who reported this at Croi this year. So it's all connected that way.
What is that? He said heterozygous.
Heterosexual.
Yeah. Heterozygous means that you got the CCR5 mutation from one of your parents. Homozygous means you got it from both of them. So the allele that contains that, heterozygous means they're different. There's one that's mutated and resistant, and there's one that's not. Homozygous means that you have both the same, and they're both sides of the gene, both alleles are mutated.
And I love when I found this out, I'm in the max cohort, and they went to my frozen blood, and they informed me of this. So I called my parents, and I got them both on the phone, and I said, I want to thank you because one of you gave me this mutation that has allowed me to stay off HIV drugs for so long. And their first question, of course, was, which one of us gave you the mutation?
I was just about to say. Did they ever
I said, I don't know. It's probably my mom because she's Polish.
Okay.
And my dad is Italian. So likely my mom. But they wanted to take credit for it immediately.
Well, and it would be interesting to find out which one was, and if they were also heterozygous or if they were homozygous.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it would just mean like, you know, in terms of the genetic wheel of fortune, if she was your mom was heterozygous and you're heterozygous, like, just think of how much of a rare chance that was for you to get that from her, as opposed to her being homozygous.
Really. Yeah.
All right. So that's all I had to say. And I just wanted to remind you that we have a meeting next month on Tuesday, March 22nd at 5:30 p.m. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can just see you all. We will be talking about Cure again next Tuesday. I will send out an email. I'll put the link if you want to register for that in. You'll be getting that email sometime tomorrow. And I see, Shayna, you have a hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Is muted.
Yeah.
Sorry, technical problems over here.
No worries.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I just was curious with finding out about if you are heterozygous or anything like that. Is that something you just talk with your doctor about to get a lab test done? Is it that simple, or how does that work? How do you even find that out?
Yeah, it's an available test. Sure, the Delta 32 test.
Yeah,
anybody can get it.
You have to pay cash because
your insurance might not pay for it, or it might or might not. Depends on the insurance, but
right. I was just curious because I hadn't heard of that before. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I know, like 23andMe and some of those other sort of DNA tests that you can get where they're going to tell you things about your health via the DNA. That's another way that you can find that out.
Michael, will Tuesday's webinar be the same information or different?
No. I mean, we might cover some of the same information, but that would be from a researcher's perspective. So when we talk about Cure from Croi next week, it's going to be 4 different researchers: Louis Montaner, Deborah Prasad. Oh my God, I'm not going to remember the other 2. Someone from Africa, but it's going to be their impressions of the Cure research. So it could be basic science stuff that I've not even gotten into yet, or it could be talking about some of the things that we've talked about here. There might be some overlap, but I can't tell.
Did you send the registration already? Email about that?
Yeah, and I'm going to send it out again to you all specifically. So if you registered for this, you'll be getting it probably tomorrow, I'll say.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
Did you have another question? You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you for all the info. You're welcome. So we're finished, and I want to thank you all for bearing with us and enjoying that. I hope you gained something, or at least got a curiosity, and you want to follow up. Croi should be releasing.
Can I have a recording?
Yes, I will be. I will be posting the recording to this, and I'll be posting it on Facebook and YouTube, and I'll be sending those links out to you all, so you'll be able to find it that way.
Can I make a story about this for the body?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure, no worries. So again, if you have any other questions, please, you can send them to me via the email that I send out to you all. And I just want to thank you, and I hope you have a pleasant rest of your morning or night, depending where you may be joining us from. So
thank you, Michael. This is great, Michael.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye-bye.
Bye.